Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Accountancy Age and Financial Director webinar. I'm Aoife Morgan, and journalist at Accountancy Age. Today, we are talking about platform planning and why it's imperative for businesses to rely on planning, budgeting, and reporting platforms in order to succeed with their digital transformations. The common saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, is increasingly relevant for businesses looking to navigate through competitive markets and stay afloat in a post-pandemic world. Modern planning platforms are therefore key for businesses to stay agile and proactive, as well as facilitate a variety of tools and best practices to eliminate manual tasks and automate data collection for business leaders, organizations, and finance teams to strategically plan ahead. However, that's all well said and done. Finance teams nowadays are often tasked with finding ways to do more for less. Between the increasing demands for finance function support, with decreasing finance budgets, it can be a little bit of a struggle to balance both. A survey from Gartner found that 85% of finance teams are currently undergoing or planning a finance transformation. With that, many still believe such transformation can be costly and take up too much time. One of the areas we'll be exploring with our panelists is how finance teams can make quick and cost-effective changes that can have a big difference on how they plan and report. But of course, this all needs to be supported by ensuring your financial data is housed in the right place and on the right platform. If parts of your data are still housed in multiple fragmented systems, it can be harder for teams to plan, budget, and forecast efficiently. One of the things we'll learn about is the Workday Adaptive Planning solution and how it can give organizations a full view of their financial picture while delivering data-driven insights that can support leaders in making more informed and timely decisions. We will also be discussing how using analytical reporting tools can aid senior finance leaders in becoming stronger partners for the business. We have some fantastic guests joining us today to discuss all of this. First, I'd like to welcome Mark Bodger, Director at ICit Business Intelligence. As a CIMA qualified finance professional, Mark advises clients on how to improve corporate performance management and helps finance leaders adopt cloud planning, reporting, and analysis solutions. Next, we have Christian Lindholm, Vice President and Head of the EMEA Financial Management at Workday. Christian has more than 15 years of experience in the planning and analytics space, and during his career has worked with multiple planning technologies, including Hyperion and SAP Business Planning and Consolidation. We're also joined by Tim Slyman, Head of Group Financial Planning and Analysis at Marlborough Group. Tim has previously worked for AstraZeneca and Kellogg's over his 12 years as an accountant and has delivered process improvements and utilized his business partnering skills to add value across the wider business. Finally, we have Yehan Jayasinghe, Senior Manager of Enterprise Performance Management, specializing in finance transformation at KPMG, joining us. Yehan has over 20 years of experience in enterprise performance management and has led large-scale transformations while delivering significant efficiencies through automating end-to-end finance processes. It's lovely to have you all with us today. And just a quick note to the audience, we'll be answering your questions at the end of the webinar. So please feel free to submit any that you have using the chat box on your screen, and we will do our best to answer them at the end of the session. And without further ado, let's get into it. So the way businesses operate has changed significantly in the last 18 months. We can safely say the pandemic has played a huge role in this. For some businesses, they were already on their transformation journey, and over the course of the pandemic, we saw an acceleration in their transformation. What are some of the digital tools that have been adopted to promote productivity and streamline workloads within business? Mark, if we go to you first.
Yeah, welcome everybody, and good morning, and thanks for joining the webinar today. ICit as a business, we've seen almost a microcosm of the country and the economy this last 18 months, dealing with small, medium, large enterprises, and how those companies have reacted to the challenges that beset us all at the start of the pandemic. The focus on business planning became sharper and sharper, with the initial sort of push for cash flow forecasting being primarily the top of everybody's list. But as people got to understand how the pandemic started to unroll for their businesses, I think it moved away from tactical cash flow planning into more medium-term, longer-term business planning. So this is a subject we'll pick up in more detail throughout the session, how we've gone from a pure financial planning context through to a more enterprise planning context. And I think a lot of our customers that initially got on this particular road to planning realised that very quickly and wanted to understand not only the impact on cash, but on the impact on business drivers down the line in terms of their operations, their people, their resources, not just the P&L and the cash flow. So I think in that context, that's the debate for me really, is how we go from this standard sort of financial view of the world to a more business-wide view. And then that was pretty much the kickoff I wanted to talk about today, and probably hand over to Jan for a little bit of context on that particular theme.
Thank you, Mark. You're absolutely spot on. The pandemic has been a really big learning experience for companies, and in KPMG we've done a bit of research, and that's certainly come through. In those early stages of the pandemic, those dark days, I think what we saw was companies were really on that survival mode. It was all about cash flow, as you quite rightly say, and finance teams were really under a lot of stress. They were operating with very little information, trying to do all kinds of scenarios, worst case scenario, even worst case scenario, all the time. There was a lot of iterations being done, very top down. But I think what we saw is that as the months passed, things start to stabilize. And what's quite interesting is that this is when we started to see some of the companies which were somewhat more mature on their platform planning journeys actually start to differentiate themselves. We saw companies like BP, Whitbread, for instance, where they started not only to look at the immediate preservation, right, survival, looking at the cash, protecting their assets, protecting their business, but they also started looking at two other things, which is around what's the recovery going to look like, how do we come out of this, but also the longer term. So, looking at those three things, they can't be done by spreadsheet. This is where we actually saw the companies where they were having much more of an integrated set of systems, an integrated planning process, a single source of data, a single set of processes in terms of their planning actually really shine through in terms of their ability to actually align their company, the different functions in the company around what needed to be done. Because, at that time, Mark, when resources are so tight, my God, it's so important that companies go after the things that really matter. So that bring that alignment, and that those systems. What we saw is they were able to enable companies pivot in the necessary directions to actually go after the opportunities, react to the changing environment. So we saw those companies that were further on their platform planning journey really start to differentiate themselves from companies that were more in the sort of traditional spreadsheet planning arena.
Mm-hmm. And you kind of alluded to it, and I know that platform planning is a key part of digital transformation. I mean, how important is a tool like platform planning when it comes to business growth and scalability and marketing efforts? Maybe Christian, if we start with you and get your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for letting me join today. And I think, as Jan just started by talking about, spreadsheet is not cutting it anymore. It's very powerful platforms we're talking about. So the reason and the view on these platforms is there's a couple of things we have to look at. First of all, the speed you operate with. How fast can you move through cycles? Second is adoption. Is planning reserved for 3 people in your finance department, or do you actually include the rest of the company? And the third part is accuracy. Interesting, there was recently an FP&A study out there where it turns out we're getting poorer at planning. We're slower and we're less accurate. So that is a couple of things we have to look at down the line. If we look at some of the concrete examples, and I think Jan also came into this scenario planning, I think really the pandemic showed us what you can do with these platforms, because the advantage of being a vendor within this space is we have a chance to observe what's the usage, what's happening, who is using what in the tool. And what we saw in March last year was a 30-fold, so 3,000% increase in scenario planning on our platform. And we're talking about 6,000 customers globally here. So it's a massive number of scenario modeling going on. If you combine that with the fact that we, in a recent value study, heard from one of our customers that they reduced the time it took them to do scenario planning with 85% coming to a platform from a spreadsheet. It means if you can start doing the multiplication about how much time would have been used if you have had a spreadsheet there. So just show a little bit about the potential in actually going with platform planning. I think the biggest potential, and you alluded to it in the question about better marketing and so on. If you look at why is CEOs most often let go, there's been a lot of questions around that. But the one thing, and I can't remember if it was McKinsey or somebody else, who actually reached the point that they say it's not because of poor strategy, it's not because of some public incident, it's actually due to the fact they can't get their strategy executed. And planning bridge that gap. So with these platforms, we can actually have companies start executing on their strategies and move forward quickly. And of course, FP&A is a key part of that. If we can release more time by using a powerful tool and include more of the business in that planning to actually be capable of execute, I think we can unlock a lot of potential in companies.
And Tim, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I'd say that, well, I really want to reiterate the point that he was making around the scenario planning. That's how, for ourselves, we're now utilizing the tools to enable us to stay competitive in our environment. So to give a bit of meat to the bones of what he was saying, our company's gone through exponential growth over the last 5 years, and we've gone through transformational changes. Our headcount has doubled over that time frame. But what we're finding is we're not getting the profitability out of that, because as we're growing as a business, our cost base was growing exponentially. We needed something to move away from the spreadsheet-based systems that we had, and we could access our main cost drivers a lot quicker. So we could understand them when we're pricing in the markets. We have one area of our business which is heavily price sensitive. And without these tools, by the time we perform the analysis to see can we go in at a certain price, we'd already lost the business. The markets aren't going to wait for you to pull your spreadsheets together and get the right answers out. You need to be able to react, and quite often finance timeframes and sales timeframes are not the same. You know, they don't want to wait for a nice clean month-end position. It just doesn't work like that. You know, you need to know now, and having a tool like, you know, that is cloud-based, you can access straight away, and you've got the right data in, allows you to get just much quicker breakdowns for the wider business. And I'd say really for ourselves, it's now allowing scalability in our team. So as the business is starting to grow, we're no longer looking for additional headcount, because we can grow with the business. We've now got the fundamentals in place, and if we added another 10, 15 customers on, it won't actually change fundamentally what we're doing.
Tim, can I just
think Tim makes a great point there. Go ahead, Johan.
Tim, can I just pick up on something you just said there about cost drivers? Because yeah, sure. I cannot agree more, because sounds like you've invested the time to really understand the cost drivers, and that's a really important part of platform planning, really to understand the drivers of the business, so that you can actually run the scenarios really, really quickly. And it's not about covering every single base, right? It's about getting an 80-20 view, and this is the power of platform planning, because it gives you, if set up correctly, what it allows you to do is make sure you've spotted those key drivers, which are the things that are absolutely going to drive your revenue, your costs, your cash flow, and then you can make, as you quite rightly, Tim, say, the market's not going to wait for you. You can run those scenarios really quick and make those decisions, and then reach out to, if it's sales or if it's projects or whoever it is, the function around those decisions. So completely agree with you. This is one of the things that platform planning does. And if I could just add one more thing, is around, linked to that is what I call a common data model, because what that allows, because one of the challenges when you in a world full of spreadsheet systems sellotaped together, you have data which is dispersed, and therefore you can't leverage the power of the data. With platform planning, you're able to have much more of a consistent, standard, common data model, which you can then see not only financial data but operational data. So to help that decision making. Hope that resonates. Sorry, Mark, I interrupted you before.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, and one that, I've been on my soapbox many times talking about. This sort of extended FP&A subject we started out at the start here was, very important. It's not just about the mechanics of doing a driver-based forecast or budget or plan. For me, it's the change management and the buy-in of finance and non-finance people in the business, all working towards the same goals, the same strategy, which allows that buy-in of that particular plan. Many years ago, I worked for a large retailer, and it was a classic case. We'd create a financial plan, and then we talk to the operations about our objectives, and they would say, well, we'll only tool up or skill up to 80% of that plan because we know your sales forecasts are always too high. So, there's always that disconnect between what corporate wanted as a strategy, as a number, and what operations would actually believe and actually, work to, because they weren't involved in the planning process. They were told what the number was. So by moving that away from being a finance-centric exercise or process and becoming more corporate, enterprise-wide process, you ultimately buy trust and build trust between finance and the rest of the organization to allow those plans to become business plans and owned by all the business owners, not just by the finance team. And for me, that's one of the biggest benefits of platform or planning across the enterprise, that it gets that everybody working to the same number and as a theme and as a thing to believe in, and not just something that finance has thrown at the business to trying to achieve. So for me, that's one of the biggest benefits of collaborative planning, is that by definition, bringing everybody together, working towards the same plan.
Maybe if I can add a little bit to that, Mark. I think 2 points. If you look at the history of platform planning, let's be real. Trying to get everyone to get on platform been around for a while. But what we probably really have seen is the usability of these platforms, where it used to be super advanced, super technical, and require you probably having a PhD in computer science to get through. Then I really think what we have to look at is how usable is the platform, what's the user adoption, coming back to the change management. I have examples from my career where we've seen customers have 10 times as many users on their platform when they're finally done rolling out from when they started, from the original base project. And it just means that the whole business is really pitching in. So I'm a little curious with Tim's experience, for example, in how many users to bring on board, and if there's a plan to bring on more.
Yeah, so that's actually not been a prompted question, so I'm really happy about it. We actually envisaged having only the FP&A team on, so not even the wider finance team, because it was very much our model is we'd utilize it and then go out to the teams. Our business partners wouldn't interact with the wider business. We're now actually finding that by using the dashboards and the pre-built reports, it's much easier and actually better for the wider business to have the entire business on the platform, and they can access that information at the time they need it. Now, obviously, there's certain things from our perspective we need to make sure then that the data as it's going in is accurate, which, you know, that's all part of the wider project, isn't it? But yeah, we initially started with an intention of between 5 and 10, and we're now going to be, well, in the first stage, at least 200. So yeah, I reiterate that point.
Well, that was really great insight, and I know you kind of all spoke about the role of planning platforms, and I guess how does cloud-based planning solutions help businesses to provide better control as well? And I guess maybe Mark, if we go to you first.
Yeah, I mean, control, I mean, it's very much part of the monthly process, and every FD and financial planning analysis person on the call today will realise that the key to good forecasting is good solid actual data. So that close period needs to be as short as possible and as accurate as possible. And part of the solution that we provide here is to integrate and automate a lot of those month-end processes such that you can straight into week 2 of doing forecasting and planning, not wait until week 3 or week 4 when it's too late. So we talk a lot about easy and powerful and fast with these platforms. But the whole purpose is to give people, i.e. intelligent, educated, qualified accountants and business people, the time to think about the information, to use that information to make better decisions. And we've been talking about that for a long time. So by accelerating that close process, that allows people the time to sit back and think and make informed decisions based on the data and the trends and the analysis that they're seeing, not on the old traditional gut feel. It's about, right, let's just make this decision on the hoof because we can't wait for finance to create a number. So it starts building that trust in the function, so the FP&A function, and maybe Tim can alert to that, but in terms of your reputation as a team, in terms of the speed of delivery of that information back to the business and the quality of that information, it enhances the finance function, builds those bridges, and then adds the value to the business that it may not have seen in the past.
Yeah, so if I could just jump in there. So I think the trust point is a very good one. So you need to make sure that the systems are allowing the data to be accurate. But you're right on the closing time frame, allowing the team to do what they're actually being paid for. There's no point in having an FP&A team that's going to tell you revenue's up by 10% because sales are up by 10%. Well, yeah, of course it is. That's exactly what it is. You need the time for the teams to be able to say, so what? Like, what is the driver behind that? What are the things that you are, that really are the fundamental movers in that time period or whatever it is? And before on our pure spreadsheet-based system, just updating each of the entities that we had was a half an hour time period, which is it seemed archaic actually thinking about it. Like it's just we're in the modern world now. We should be able to get these through, but having that ability to see the numbers straight away means the team don't have to worry about, have I put in the right sum formula in here? Does it bring back the right data? Have I got everything working in the background? It's just the trust is there that the system's giving the right information. You've then got to give the actual real world driver behind that, and that's where you start to add value to the wider business. Because if you're continually just providing reports that are like just logically sound but don't actually add any value to anybody, your team's not going to survive. The senior manager, nobody's that silly. They will look at where they can save money in the team, and if you're not providing value, well, you're gone.
Listening to both you, Mark, and Tim speak just brought back so many memories. When I was in FP&A, when I remember we did a plan and kind of linking that back to the actuals. It was like there were like two separate universes, and it was such a manual process. And I mean, thinking now with the systems and processes that that are the technology that is available, that no longer needs to be the case, because you can have everything, your plan and your actuals, the data all aligned through sort of common data models, and that's the power of having that, having all the processes and systems aligned. I think that also really helps in turning around quick forecasts, forecasting can be a big for many organisations, be a big draw on time, organisational time to recreate the forecast bottom up every time, and going through an actualisation process can also be very time consuming. So investing the time to get those data models right such that the actuals feed through to the plan to update the forecast and things like that actually can be a big time saver. It just can't be done with Excel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I guess, with the high levels of, I guess, keeping on the topic of, planning platforms and forecasting, with high levels of uncertainty in the world right now, around the impacts of the pandemic, the kind of talent shortages we're seeing, the changing talent market, as well as, supply chain challenges and changes to the regulatory landscape. How important is it for businesses to forecast in advance? And off of that, how should business leaders look to create reliable and efficient forecasts to enable strategic decision making? And Tim, I'd be really keen to hear your kind of thoughts and experience with this.
Yeah, so like I said before, the industry that I'm working in is financial services. So we in a relatively unique position that we have to have forecasts in place for the worst case scenarios. But previously we'd been performing all these in Excel models, and to produce them it took months to actually get the right data in place. So just so you're, for the wider calls, we need to maintain certain levels of capital adequacy in case anything bad happened to the business, and we could wind it up because we've got a lot of client money. We needed to make sure that we had enough capital in place, but to actually get that through and ensuring that the right markers are in place for, if, say, 25% of your revenue goes overnight, which happened to us a year and a half ago. Do you understand what the drivers are on each cost line? Now, we've previously done this in an Excel model and built it all out. Now it's taken half a day, which is just a fundamental change in the speed. Because if you build the models in the right way, you have everything linked through to your key revenue drivers. If you move the things around, it takes the work out of it, and then you can start to plan, well, have we got the right things in the right places? Off the back of this is another point, that the uncertainty in the markets. We've had to go through an entire group restructure, some closing some businesses, opening up new ones. Again, we planned in advance in our old models, and it was a very cumbersome process. But actually getting our new budgets in place was significantly easier, because if you built it in the right way and you've got all the companies linked through, it's very much just a case of copying a new version in and just changing some of the parameters in. It's fundamentally changed how we worked.
Yeah, so thanks for that. I think that's pretty much the base that we get from customers that we talk to and prospects we speak to. I mean, it's always about the value of an investment in a platform like this. So there's always the cost element, obviously, but then people say, well, what would that give me back in terms of value? And some of the comments we've made already on this discussion around the value is that time is a big one, obviously. The time to think is probably the extension of that theme. Reducing process accuracy and risk. I mean, risk is a big one that a lot of FDs, CFOs I speak to say, that's our biggest concern every month. It's not the fact that things aren't being done, it's are they being done in a way that we can actually avert risk or capitalize on opportunities. And that's the sort of value we want from the function of FP&A, not just scorecarding that we've done for many, many years. So, mitigate my risk, identify opportunities and present that to me on a monthly basis, not just, as Tim said, sales are up and therefore profits up. What is it behind that that's driving this? And the platforms allow you to do this, mid-month. You don't have to wait for a month end anymore just to create some financial analysis. You can do this pretty much any time, any day, anywhere, because your data is up to date with real-time analytics. So I think that's the difference. When I worked in FP&A many years ago, it was very much a monthly cycle. But now you can break that monthly cycle and do analysis pretty much any time to allow you to do forecasts pretty much any time. So I think it's a mind shift as much as anything else, and a process shift. The fact that you can do these things quickly doesn't mean that you should do them more often, but it allows you to do them more often. And I think one of the big themes we're seeing also in our customer base is moving from traditional sort of annual budgeting and then quarterly forecasting. A lot of customers now are looking at rolling forecasts, which goes back to Tim and Jens' point around driver-based modeling. Having a rolling forecast, the world is changing more rapidly than ever, and having a fixed budget for 12 months is fine as a starting point, but typically now people are looking to update and do a rolling forecast pretty much on a needs basis, an ad hoc basis, not necessarily a regimented quarterly or monthly basis. So that flexibility is a game changer for me in terms of FP&A and the capability to support the business.
Maybe adding a little bit.
Sorry, go ahead, Christine. No, please.
Yeah, maybe one comment to add here, because one thing we've seen at Workday here since the beginning of the pandemic and the shift, some of you might have heard about the terminology, the Great Resignation. And this is one of these places where we've seen where a lot of employees are thinking about new jobs and so on. And suddenly we've seen a new role for planning in the company, because how do you plan for that? It's an extremely complex planning operation. So workforce planning and extending on that. So using the same FP&A tools we historically have used traditionally for dollars suddenly is turned into something else. And skill planning is one of the latest additions to that one, where we really see finance, HR, and other functions work together to deal with situations we haven't dealt with before. And especially with potentially 40% of your workforce at risk, this is really what companies are worried about right now. So we see more and more adoption specifically in that space using the platform planning tools, because they have unlocked something we couldn't plan for before.
Yeah, I think that's true. We're getting those requests every day, as you say, going beyond the extended FP&A. I keep going back to that term, I keep using it a lot, but it's very important that people grip that is not a whole new series of tools. It's the same tool, but used in a different use case. I think that's the important thing to get increases the ROI on your investment for a start, but it also increases that ability to collaborate. But the skill gap, it's so important now when you're scaling up to have the right mix of people, the right mix of skills in the right territories. How do we plan for that? We had a customer last week saying, look, with 300 employees today, we're going to be 500 by the end of next year, but we need to manage to control and manage that throughout the next 12 months. Can you help us? So that's, a real life situation where somebody, they know they're going to grow, but they need to grow with the right skill mix throughout that 12 months and plan for that in advance. And so workforce planning, skill planning, retention and recruitment becomes a very, very important part of anybody's strategic plan and operational plan. Sorry, Johan, you're going to speak.
No, that's fine, Mark. I was going to completely agree with you guys, because for me, I think, Mark, you mentioned the word risk. I'd like to say another word which begins with R, which is around resilience, because I think this really, really plays into the theme of resilience. And when the times are good, if you if I use the analogy of a company being like a ship sailing, the rocks at the bottom of the sea, it's fine. But when the sea level decreases and the rocks emerge, the whole company needs to work together to navigate through these rocks, right? And this is where platform planning systems can bring that alignment across the whole organization. The alignment actually is what that will enable is agility for the different functions to actually recognize risks, mitigate those risks, but also take advantage of opportunities. And this all leads to resilience. And we've seen, I mean, the last 18 months have been tough, but then when you look forward, there's still a lot of change out there. There's the whole ESG agenda. There's the transition to net zero. There's a lot of risk and uncertainty. And in fact, when I said earlier on, there's a lot of lessons that have been learned. I think the case has been made very, very clear. The lessons have been learned that actually, given this level of risk, in commercial risk that companies face, doing this through spreadsheets, that's a risk itself, right? Where there's a real opportunity. I think this is a seminal moment for finance to actually take a leading role and say, listen, we've seen how challenging it has been. Here's an opportunity. We don't see those risks actually lessening. There's in fact it's likely to continue, but in a different way. Here's a seminal moment for finance companies to actually finance teams to actually step forward, FP&A to step forward and say, here's an opportunity for us to bring the organization together, bring our data together, to try and find ways to help navigate what will be a whole series of challenges. We don't know what they will be, but these kind of tools are available for us to actually help make those decisions really quickly and get alignment. And actually, what we're seeing is the companies that are doing that are actually taking advantage. They're the first movers, and they're actually going to market and getting the returns from being able to move faster through this, being a lot more agile with these tools.
And that's a really interesting point you mentioned about, the alignment of the company and, the company as a whole, and aligning all the different components as well to be beneficial. And I guess, from your perspective as well, what are some of the key areas within financial planning that are perhaps overlooked by business leaders?
I think from my experience, forecasting has sometimes traditionally been a very complex task, and we touched on this, Aoife, a little bit earlier, which is around there's a real opportunity to really simplify forecasting, to take a more of a value driver based approach. Having linked to forecasting is the actualization process, linking actual performance. So I always see that planning and performance are actually, they are two sides of the same coin. But in many companies, they're seen as different exercises, but they're not. They're the same. They're part of the same process, right? It's just different timescale. So I think there's a real opportunity to make sure through data alignment that those are consistent. But then I think there's a whole set of new opportunities, Aoife. I think on the way, if companies can get their systems aligned and data models sort of aligned across the organization, to really democratize that data through things like dashboards, self-service dashboards, where different parts of the business can go in and look at how they're performing, not just how they're performing, but how the rest of the organization is performing, what their contribution is, being able to run, sensitivities, high-level sensitivities, but also confidence intervals. I think. So I'm a little bit of a sort of a data analytics nerd here. So I like confidence intervals. I like to understand what the risk is around particular forecasts, and you can't do that if the data is all dispersed around. So I think there's a big opportunity to look at all the analytical and visualization that can be done sort of going forward, so to help those decision making.
Yeah, I think I'd like to back that point up. Yeah, in my experience, I remember a CEO saying to me once, he sat at his desk and he said, "I've got all these levers on my desk, all these operations, all these people. If I pull a lever, I don't know what the impact's going to be at all. It's not joined up, it's disconnected. How do I fix this?" And I think one of the realizations there is a very obvious one, is to say, and in fact, this theme keeps coming back, but it's about the integration of these processes, not having silo-based planning, which has traditionally been the problem with particularly larger businesses, if not medium-sized businesses, that the planning exercise would kick off and all these little islands of data would start kicking out of spreadsheets, and merchandising plan would be sent out on the back of a sales plan to operations, but that's changed 3 times before they received it. So the complete disconnect between what the initial, like Chinese whispers, what the initial idea was to what it finally hit the ground. And the business leader at the top's thinking, well, I said we'd do 2 billion in sales, but now it's come back to me, it's only 1.5 billion because we've lost all this stuff through the passing off of plan A to plan B to plan C. And that what used to frustrate the CEOs I used to work for, saying, I need somebody who can tell me that this plan is a business plan. And I keep going back to that theme because it's the one that used to drive the people I work for, the most senior people, the CFOs, CEOs, almost to despair, because they said, we've set out this strategic plan, we want to convert it into an operational plan, but we never actually get there because we spend 6 months doing this. By the time we get there, it's out of date. So we're way past that now. I think, if we took across my customer base, so just as a micronism, and Workday got 6,000 customers doing this today, they've broken that particular problem. They've fixed it. They're now into value added. And there's no excuse now, as I was about to say. We were doing this back in 2005, and we're 15, 16 years on from that. These tools have got better and smarter and easier to use and easier to adopt. There really is no excuse to stay in the old world of spreadsheets and silo-based planning and static planning, as we used to call it. Integration is the answer to fixing these business leader perceptions of performance that aren't happening in the real world. So that for me is my standout, my call out, whatever, from this particular discussion today, is that integration, collaboration, they're the 2 things that people really got to fix, and fix them today, because it's and the perception that these things can take a long time. We'll get onto this maybe a little bit later, but I often get the question, how long will it take? How long will it cost? How much will it cost? Our traditional projects in this area for a phase 1, you're talking 2 to 3 months maximum for integrated P&L balance sheet with some operational impact on that as well, whether it's HR planning or operational planning or working out asset planning. So the short projects, but very impactful projects, and people shouldn't fear them. They're pretty much a 2 to 3 month engagement to get the first pass of this done. So that'd be my other point, to say that the myth of it taking a long time, costing a lot of money, is old-fashioned as well.
Maybe to add a little bit on what's missed right now, because I fully agree, but we're still talking about the move from spreadsheet to a platform. But if I actually look at customers and planning tools, platform planning tools in general, there's still a bunch of the functionality. I don't know how many of the buttons in your Word or Excel you actually use on a daily basis. We have a little bit of that going on the planning platforms as well. Since if you look at a topic like intelligent planning, so use of machine learning, use of statistical forecasting, use of those things, we still see a relatively low adoption of that. So I really think there's a lot more to get from that. A discipline like sales forecasting. Sales forecasting is notoriously known for being unpredictable, especially when it comes bottom up. I have examples from customers where the statistical model beat the bottom up 8 quarters in a row. So that's a example of where a statistical forecast or machine learning or algorithmic use can increase the accuracy manyfold. So I don't know if any of the rest of you have any experience with these new technologies and their adoption, and how we can facilitate that adoption, because I think there's so much unlocked potential with that technology.
Yeah, I think we're getting a lot more discussion around that subject. Obviously, getting the base in place to start with, but now we're obviously presenting these new features in the products today to prospects and customers, and particularly I'm finding bizarrely more on the demand side, demand planning side of the business. They're looking at that more statistically because they're in OR, in operational research and statistical planning. That's what they've done as a job for many, many years, and now they've got the tools that are easy to adopt. You don't need to be a data scientist to use these tools. You just need good quality data, a little bit of history, and to run these algorithms over that history. And I think that's taking away that sort of specialist OR department that we used to have to more mainstream analysts within the functions of finance and or supply chain that can do these predictions for themselves now. And I think that's what's going to start shifting the focus on this area, because it's adoptable. People can actually understand it and use it. And I think that's the big shift, Christine, in the last sort of 12 months, that this introduction of AI forecasting, machine learning into mainstream products such as planning products, which traditionally hasn't been in there, it was a specialist tool, has taken off, I think, in terms of the conversation I'm having with prospects as we go into market today.
And yeah, no, thanks for that. And it's great, especially, I mean, you kind of partly answered the next question that I have around, trends that we'll see around financial planning and streamlining workloads in the next year, especially with, the introduction of the new technologies that you've kind of already highlighted. And I guess, for Tim and Johan, what do you see as, some of the trends that we will see around financial planning and streamlining those workloads in the next few years?
So I'll start first. I think Christy makes a superb point that the technology now available will take away a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the forecasting that we have. And I think the trend for like my team and the like across the business isn't going to be pulling this data in from the group, because it will just be there. What will be there for will be the what ifs. So how do we work if this model's out by 10%, what does that mean for the business? If we have 10% increase in headcount, what does that mean? And what I've found that even in our early adoption of this is we're able to answer these questions live. So we can be in the boardroom just plugged into a screen and they say, right, well, what happens if we lose 20% of our staff overnight? And it's one button pressed and then it's in there. That is already transformational from my perspective. Going forward, if you couple that in with then integrated, like bottom-up Salesforce planning included on top of the predictive elements, you're going to have much more like a fundamental basis for your top-end predictions, rather than what is currently is that. It doesn't really cut the mustard, does it? And I think as well, I can see a big trend at the moment of the FinAx side of the business being automated to a point where there'll be a lot of like redundant work there. It will just be computer based getting through. So the FP&A element will have to increase, because you're just going to be adding the whys of this. It's not going to be a question of what anymore. That'll just be done, and the machines will be clever enough to do that. And if you're not adaptable to getting into this and finding out the real reasons behind all this, then you're just going to get left behind. That's how I see it anyway.
Yeah, I think Tim, you're spot on. If I think the technology's tried and tested. It's there. It's very, very powerful. From my perspective, I think the tricky thing is getting the business, getting that business alignment right, because this is where I've seen finance in the past doing the planning and in a very, very siloed way, and there are different parts of the business, whether it be sales or manufacturing, procurement, all these siloed planning. And so along with this technology I think this is why we've got a conversation, not only talking about the technology, but also the people that can actually help in terms of implementing that, around in bringing on board the different parts of the business to try and get that alignment. So, you know, getting the corporate executive sponsorship, having established sort of almost like out-of-the-box processes of how to engage with different parts of the business to get alignment around having these platform planning tools as a way of bringing all of the data, all of the planning processes together and aligned. Because I think that's a big part of the process. It's as important as the technology. I actually think the technology is the easy bit, is actually bringing the people along with you and just getting that organizational alignment that we're actually going to work in a different way to deliver the organization goal. It's one thing to have the tools, it's another thing to use those in a way that actually makes the company drive in a consistent, standard way. So, for example, in KPMG, we have a power toolbox which enables us to actually have these tried and tested ways of bringing that change process in the most efficient way possible, as the technology is tried and tested, but also the change process is also tried and tested as well. So I think it's important to kind of emphasize that people aspect of it, because I think that has to go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that, and thank you to the rest of you guys as well for sharing your great insight on the topic. And there are a couple of key points, that I think our audience should be taking away, including the growing risk of using spreadsheets and, the importance of getting the alignment right when it comes to, financial planning and using the right platforms, not just from a data perspective, but also from a people perspective too, and, just supporting, the processes you have in place to make the most out of them, I think is really important. And, as I mentioned earlier, the panel will be answering audience questions, and we've had a number come in during, the webinar. And but feel free to submit, questions that you might have as well during the Q&A too, and we'll get around to answering those. And to kick us off, we have a question on what are the tools needed for scenario planning, since spreadsheets cannot do enough. And who'd like to go first with us answering this question?
Yeah, I think we could all answer that one. The tools are classified these days as corporate performance management tools, or CPM is typically the name. I know Gartner are bringing out various new definitions of these things. You'll probably see the latest one will be, I described a couple of times, the extended FP&A tools. But these tools are obviously databases, but the key thing about the Workday application that we've talked about today is the inbuilt financial intelligence and machine learning. So that's already baked into the solution. It's not something you've got to create or code. So we talk very much about configuration of these solutions, not coding. And I think that's a big difference. And maybe Tim would back that up, but it's not a overly technical implementation. It's more business-led with some business rules, and the tools are pretty much configured around the Office of Finance and Operations to be configured to meet your business. So it's a long answer to the short question of which tools. So the CPM tools, which have both the ability to have dashboarding and reporting, inputs and outputs, and calculations on business rules. So you get everything in the same solution rather than needing 3 or 4 point solutions that we did in the past. You just need one, scalable cloud-based solution to do all those things in one solution.
Mm-hmm. And we have another question. So what's the best way to implement or integrate new technology? And in your experience, what was the biggest obstacle to implementation, and how did you overcome it?
So
again, from my
I'll answer that from
Go on, Tim. After you.
Yeah, I was going to say I'll answer this from a practical perspective because that's we've just gone through this process in the last 18 months. So the best way for it, we found, especially given the resource, is either have a dedicated project team within your business or reach out to a professional integration team who are going to be able to implement it, such as ICit, which is what we use. But what I would strongly suggest, and I know they have different models, I'm not trying to sort of go through theirs, but is having a collaborative approach to the integration, because you don't want somebody just to come in, get it all nice and shiny and then leave, because the world moves. And as I mentioned before, we've gone through a complete group reorganization, but we didn't have to go back out to anybody else to be able to change that. We have the skill sets internally because we integrate it in a collaborative way. So I'd say that's the thing that I'd take away from it. Also, though, this is fundamental, is if your underlying finance system doesn't have the right data, it doesn't matter what you plug on top of it. So for ourselves, the year before, so we're part of a finance journey, we made sure that we had standardized chart of accounts, we had the right BI in place, and the raw data was coming in a format that was usable as we went through. Now, I'd had prior experience of this in bigger organizations, so I knew what good looked like. But if you don't get that right in the first instance, there's no point in bringing in something here, because you'll just have a mismatch of data that's coming in from different companies in different forms. You can't integrate, you can't consolidate, and it'll just be a mess. So that is the area that I'd say is fundamental. And I'd say it's one of the biggest obstacles for getting it in correctly, is you don't have the raw data at the right format. And then obviously, how did we overcome it? We fixed it before we even went out to market. So before we even looked at any integrated tool, we made sure that the underlying finance system was in the right shape. You almost need to know what the end goal is when you're starting at the beginning.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I guess, sorry, no, go ahead.
Yeah, just adding to Tim in terms of the obstacle is something I mentioned earlier around just bringing people along. It's just so important that building that case for change. We have with everything that's gone through over the last 18 months, it should be very, very. There's a lot of material that within the company, but also looking at cases in other corporations for the case for change, for bringing the different parts of the organisation together under this new common standard way of planning. I think that for me, and this is where I think we can certainly help organisations help build that consensus, that alignment, that in their change process.
Maybe one quick comment on that, because I know we expanded the conversation today and spoke about FP&A and all the different ways of planning. I would say my strong recommendation to anyone undergoing this journey is pick a manageable scope from the outset and then grow from there. Like Tim said, they started with thinking it was 5 or 6 people, and it got a lot more. It's a lot easier to start small and end big. Most of the modern tools allow you to grow. So maybe that's my recommendation as a vendor.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think Christian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, Mark, if you want to kind of jump in.
We talk about time to value a lot in first phase, to back up Christian's point. So, the first phase should be a 2 to 3 month exercise, no longer, to get that value, get that buy-in, get that collaboration, and get that use of that tool across the business, so they get confidence from which you can then grow across the business. So keep it tight and get it value delivered within that short space of time is a key differentiator.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. But thank you for the brilliant questions, and thank you again to our fantastic speakers, Mark, Christy, and Tim and Jehan, for answering and sharing all your expertise. And thank you again to our audience for listening. For now, that's all from us, but until next time, goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.